question.
Oh, great. What is the role of contemporary music in development? Oh, wow, we're really jumping right in here, right? Okay. What is the role of contemporary music in developing one's career in music? I mean, that's really, I think, up to you. Certainly, it's impossible to me to imagine having a career in music these days without at least some element of contemporary music, and certainly the ability to learn, play, and interpret it with professionalism and enthusiasm. And how much of that part of your career is focused on that is sort of a personal choice, I think. Um, does that make sense? Hopefully, I think everybody is really playing has to understand and play contemporary music since it is what's happening today. But it doesn't have to be everything you do. Okay, next question. What are a few core principles you encourage your students to focus on in the practice room? That's a really good question, and I would say there are many core principles, but let's focus on a few of the most important ones. The 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 two biggest things I think in the practice room are how you listen to yourself and the care with which you listen. So some of that is listening live as you play and also recording yourself, both video and audio, so that you are getting a more honest reflection of what you're doing. I think as we're playing, because our brain is focused on so many different things, you're not able to hear everything you're doing. And hearing yourself play back from a different perspective can be really, let's say, clarifying. And so that's one core principle, is really learning how to listen carefully, and the other core principle is really learning how to problem solve problems. So when you hear something in your playing that you don't like, learning how to address those problems in creative and positive ways. So rather than simply telling yourself, well, that sounds bad, it's out of tune, I'm not doing this well, to be really mindful of how you're addressing those problems, breaking them down, saying, well, this passage is out of tune, but today I'm going to really work on one element of that, whether it's a shift or a position. And then tomorrow I'm going to also work on another element, and gradually putting small, manageable fixes together to solve a bigger problem. And if those are your two big focuses in practicing, which is listening carefully and honestly to yourself, and creative, positive problem solving, where you're breaking things down very, very minutely and putting them back together gradually and carefully with a huge amount of slow practice, I think then you're probably doing some good practicing. What are do you have any exercises to get control of your vibrato? I understood the foundations, but my arm has a tendency to vibrate faster than I intend. Yes, absolutely. So usually I find that when your hand is vibrating faster than you intend, that is typically an issue of tension. And the more tension you have, especially in your left side of your body, the harder it is to really have control over your vibrato in the way that you have the choice of how you're wanting to vibrate. So what I would really be focusing on is not just relaxing my left hand, but all the elements of it, from your jaw and your neck, through your shoulder, through your arm, into your left hand, so that you're vibrating in a relaxed manner. So for me, I know I will tend to, and for a lot of my students, very often this is where the tension is beginning. So in my neck and here through the top of my shoulder. Once that starts getting tense, if I do this, it's really hard to control my vibrato. So if the first place you can release your tension is your shoulders, and sometimes the best way to find that release is to really tense your shoulders up and the side of your neck, and then release it. And be aware of what that feels like when that gets released, so that you can recreate that as you're playing. So if you can really think of your shoulder blades as dropping together and down, sliding down your spine. Not in a way where you're forcing them down, but in a way more like when you sigh, like that feeling. If you can maintain that feeling in your upper body, it will allow the rest of your arm to relax, which will give you the ability to vibrate any way you want. This is, of course, assuming you're not also gripping with your thumb and your fingers. Some exercises to get control of it. So, starting with a sigh and a relaxation of my shoulder blades, there are 2 to 3 main exercises that I typically have students do. And one is a circle. So, you want to really feel that your left arm weight is what is pulling the string down. So you're not squeezing the string down with your finger muscles. This is a really important element to start getting your arm relaxed and moving correctly. So I'm now starting to circle, and it's more like my arm drops and bounces back up, so that my left shoulder is remaining relaxed and everything is moving and working together. And then you can start moving that. And there's another question coming in from Christian about warm-up routine. And this is one thing that I will do sometimes as a warm-up routine, where I'm going to circle on each finger. And this is just to get everything relaxed. And then back again. So I'm feeling the balance of my arm and my arm weight pulling the string down rather than squeezing the string with my finger. So that is a first good exercise actually for vibrato, even though you might think it's not. And then another classic exercise that I have done for years and my students do is a fast and relaxed shift. So once you're relaxed, it's to be able to shift, and then you're going to gradually make that shift smaller until you're in one place to get your vibrato going. So those are 2 sort of basic exercises you can start doing to maintain the control of your vibrato. And then, of course, we've all grown up, I think, having to do vibrato with a metronome, so that you're starting with a number of pulses per beat. So 1, if my metronome was 1, 2, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4. Then I'm going to make my metronome go up a little higher, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, until I'm going faster and faster and faster. Perhaps those will help a little bit. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm falling behind here. Sorry. Preparation for orchestral auditions. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so my preparation for orchestral auditions, and I'm going to just assume that we're going to start from, you already know what the list is, and you know the notes and the basics of each excerpt, and you know what piece you're going to play for your solo. At that point, I would say 75% of my preparation is done under tempo, and at least 50% is with the metronome on. But as you're playing slowly and as you're playing with the metronome, which will also sort of address the next question about phrasing and big musical ideas, making them obvious, you want to be practicing slowly with the metronome as if you were performing that excerpt. So I'm not going to be playing one way when I'm playing slowly without expression, and then suddenly, as I play fast, suddenly trying to add new expression. I'm figuring out my phrasing at a slow speed within the framework of good rhythm. So that as I get faster and faster and closer to tempo, that all of the things that you have to do technically in order to make that expression really audible to the listener is ingrained and paired with your technique, that it's not a separate kind of practice. So if I were practicing, say, let's say I was practicing Beethoven Fifth Symphony, which is, you know, a little bit common, right? And if I'm practicing the scherzo movement, and I want to make sure that my phrase in those first 8 notes is going up to the downbeat of the third bar. So I'm not going to practice slowly. Hoping that somehow when I play fast it's going to have a phrase in it. I'm going to be exaggerating that phrase at a very slow tempo. So I would be practicing. And then gradually, over the course of weeks, bringing that tempo all the way up so that that phrase is ingrained in the technique of playing it. And I hope that is the sort of what you were asking in terms of process of preparation and making big musical ideas obvious. Now, the other thing I will say about preparation for orchestral auditions is that there are 2 big elements that I feel a lot of us try to skip over. The first being approaching our excerpts as if we were approaching any other piece of music that you were playing. So if I'm preparing a Mozart excerpt, I want to make sure that I'm really knowledgeable about everything else that's going on in the orchestra during those passages. That I don't just know the cello line, that I know all the other music and I know how what I'm playing fits in. And that I have a really strong personal sense of how I want Mozart to be played in terms of stylistically, right? What kind of sound? What is it I'm doing? That I'm not just trying to approach an excerpt like an Olympic event, right? Where you're going for perfection. You really want to address it as if it were, which it is, a piece of music and you happen to be playing part of it. So that means a lot of listening to recordings, and not necessarily just of the symphony that your excerpt is from, but other symphonies by the same composer, other chamber music, so that your sense of appropriate style for that piece is knowledgeable and is based on more than just learning 8 bars of it. The other thing that we really love to skip over, I think all of us when we're preparing for auditions, is playing for other people, which of course right now is a little trickier, but the more you can perform through your audition list with your solos in front of friends, in front of people, the better it's going to feel, because you really need to make sure you have performed them a gazillion times. The first time we perform anything is not going to be our best. You want to be playing through your full audition list, I would say at least 10 times in front of people before you go to the audition in sort of the month leading up to it. You know, and sometimes you're going to be getting comments back, sometimes you don't even need to, so that you have done it. By the time you get to the audition, it's not your first time experiencing that audition, it's like your 15th time. And it's really familiar, and you know what you have to think about in each excerpt, before each excerpt, exactly what your brain is going to be telling you to do so that you can achieve a sense of consistency and comfort. Okay, we'll come back. I'm wondering, demonstrate what you must play when select. Okay. What would I demonstrate? What would I play, and what would I be listening for when I'm selecting a new bow? You know, that's funny. I was actually helping a student do just that yesterday. So I would want to do several things. One is I want to hear somebody playing that bow with the cello it's going to be played on. So I want to think about the bow in terms of what it sounds like out in hopefully a large space in a concert hall, but a practice room, if that's all you've got, that works. And I also want to know what the bow feels like when I'm playing it. So I'm really listening for, can it produce a wide range of colors and volumes and types of sound? How's the bow balanced? How does it bounce? How clean is the articulation? And also, how comfortable is it when I play? So if those are the things I'm looking for, I want to try to play a variety of different pieces and styles as I'm trying the bow. So I would want to maybe play a little bit of a big romantic concerto, beginning of Dvorak. How does that sound? Does it produce that big, huge, resonant, powerful sound? I would want to play a little, like a classical cello line from a quartet or a symphony that has a lot of spiccato in it, like the Beethoven, so that I can feel how that works. I'm going to play some Bach to see how clean the bow feels as I'm crossing strings and how many different colors I can get. How does it work when I'm not trying to produce a huge concerto-like sound? So, and I'm going to play a variety of pieces from different time periods and different parts of the repertoire. So, chamber music, orchestra, solo, concerto, so that I really can feel the range of the bow, and I can play the exact same things on the exact same cello in the same order with each bow that I'm trying, so that it's really consistent across the board. Can I address flying fingers in the left hand, both with fast passages on one string and keeping fingers close to the fingerboard when you're crossing a string? From fourth on D to first on A. Okay, so this is a question from Cindy Jepson. Can I address flying fingers in the left hand with fast passages on one string and keeping fingers close to the fingerboard when crossing strings? For example, fourth on the D string to first on the A string. Okay, so Cindy, I'm not 100% clear that I'm understanding you correctly. So I'll try to answer both ways I'm thinking you might be meaning for the question. Flying fingers, do you mean how would I address fingers going up too high? Or how do I make fingers go faster? So I am going to start with fingers going faster, which is, we really want to think about lifting rather than pushing down, okay? So as I'm practicing a fast passage, I'm really thinking about lifting my finger from this knuckle here, okay? So you want to imagine, if you've ever looked inside a piano, how the hammers lift and go back down really cleanly. So I want to think that my fingers are staying curved, and they're going up and down from here, and that I'm really thinking about the up part of the motion rather than the down part. The down will be my fingers simply falling. So if I'm trying to do something fast, I want to make sure my fingers are curved and relaxed, and I'm going to lift. So I might practice slowly, and as I'm going from string to string, I'm going to practice the whole position so that I feel my hand is in this position. So if I'm practicing from 4 to 1, I'm going to practice double stops actually in the entire first position, so that I'm practicing the relationship between this finger and that finger within the position. And as I do that, I'm going to make sure that my hand is staying curved, and I'm lifting, but I'm not lifting and stretching, right? So I'm going to do that, and then I will also practice the passage melodically, thinking about lifting the fingers. I hope that helps. Flying fingers. Okay, next question. Hello from Brazil. Hello. Would you please explain the effect of playing the same note one octave higher? Okay, so the effect of playing the same note one octave higher. I'm not sure, do you mean in terms of practicing for intonation and playing, like checking an octave against an open string, or are you talking about an artificial harmonic? So I'm wondering, maybe that questioner could you maybe clarify your question just so I can answer it more accurately? Okay, question from Angela. What do you think about tuning the cello, comparing the octave harmonic on the A with the third harmonic? Doesn't this make, yes, 2 cents low because the third partial is 2 cents sharp. Yes, absolutely. So if I'm tuning my cello, you're talking about that. I don't do that very much. If you're really getting lost, intonation was like, is my D string really high or really low? You could use it. I don't think it's very accurate. You're much better off when you're tuning your cello to use the open strings and hear how they sound together. And I find that a lot of us, as we're listening to that, will panic and say, it's not in tune, I don't know if it's sharp or flat. Well, the easiest way to figure out if you're panicking and you're lost is go one direction. If it gets worse, you're going the wrong direction. And do it really incrementally and really patiently. And you really want to make sure that you're not just going like that. Let yourself play the two strings out of tune for a while and really listen to it with a gentle but not fuzzy sound. So you have to listen to it for that long. You can't rush through the process. And trust yourself. Your ear really will tell you when it's in tune, because you'll know it when you hear it. Suddenly it'll sound right. And don't be afraid to turn your tuner the wrong way if you're not sure. If you go the wrong way and it starts getting worse, you can just reverse course and it's fine. Just do a little at a time. Question from Robert Wang. I'm a 57-year-old beginner. Do I have any tips for an adult amateur on how to develop a good tone? Robert, that's a really, really good question, and kudos for you to have the dedication to learning new skills as an adult. I think a lot of us are too self-judgmental and don't allow ourselves the opportunity to do such a fun thing. I have two main pieces of advice for you in terms of how to develop a good tone. Possibly three. The first one is to listen to a huge amount of music. And not even just cellists, but other string players too. In order to produce a really beautiful sound and a really beautiful tone, you need to really clarify in your mind what sound you're attempting to create so that you know what you want it to sound like. And then the next thing you want to do is feel free to experiment, okay? By experiment, I mean be okay with closing your eyes and just listening to the sound of your cello as you're playing even just a single note. And just keep playing that note using your ears as a guide. As the sound changes, you're evaluating, is this better? Is this worse? If it's better, take a second as you're playing the note to figure out, what does my body feel like when I like my sound better? You can recreate a sensation you feel in your body much easier than you can somebody telling me, if I put my finger like this on my bow, my sound will be better. So use your ears as a guide. Know what sounds you're wanting to hear, and then keep playing slowly and relaxed and gently until you hear that sound, and then try to recreate that sound again. And it will get better and better. The more relaxed your shoulders and neck are, the more tension you've released there, the easier it will be to create a sound that you like. Of course, it's easier to say release tension than to do it, but okay. Question from Thibaut from France. Bonjour. Could I share my experience on bows? What kind do I like the most? Light, flexible, strong, warm. For what repertoire and what about my ideal bows? Which qualities do you put on top of your expectations? Really, okay. That's a really good question, Thibaut. So I will start with my general philosophy about both instruments and bows before we sort of get into my personal preferences. First, I really encourage everybody to adopt a philosophy of it's not so much about the equipment as it is the player. Okay? I could give Yo-Yo Ma a cigar box and he would make it sound absolutely gorgeous. And simultaneously, I could give a Stradivarius to a new cellist who doesn't know how to play yet and it would sound terrible. So anybody can make whatever instrument it is you have, whatever bow you have, whatever budget you have to purchase one, you can find something and make it sound incredible and sound like you within that price range, okay? What I personally prefer in a bow, varies a little bit depending on what instrument I'm playing it on. So I would highly encourage you to have your cello first and then get a bow that works well with that cello. Because a bow that sounds phenomenal and works really well on one cello is maybe not quite the right match for a different instrument. My personal preference, particularly just based on my instrument, I like a bow that's well balanced, but with quite a heavy tip. I don't like a light bow or a light tipped bow. It's very easy to take weight out of the string. It's harder to put weight into the string, right? In a relaxed way. So, and I find that a bow, for me, that has an extremely light tip requires a lot more effort to sustain my sound through the tip. So, for me, I prefer a heavier tipped bow, not clunky, obviously, that has a very comfortable balance point, which for me is not in the middle of the bow, but is sort of in the more traditional place of sort of halfway between the frog and the middle. So those are sort of my two personal preferences, and I don't know if that's so much for just me and my technique or if it's my instrument. Do I think there's one perfect bow for everything? Probably not. On the other hand, I think if you really are mindful of it, you can use any bow to do anything. You don't need to switch bows per repertoire. Now, I'll use a different bow maybe, especially at work if there's a lot of cold legno. I'm not going to use a really, really gorgeous, beautiful old bow and start smacking the strings with it. But other than that, I generally don't switch back and forth between different bows depending on repertoire, with very rare exceptions. Question from Sonia in Sydney. Hot tips on smooth bow changes from down bow to up bow. Changes up to down bow. Yes, okay. Bow changes are always one of our more challenging aspects of technique for sure. So, I would say this. There's a lot of different ways of thinking of the motion, all right? And depending on who your teacher is, they'll use different words and really all to say the same thing. Now, your goal, though, is to keep your bow, and I'm holding my bow with my right hand here just to demonstrate, to keep your bow as it comes in straight across the string and on the same place, and then to reverse course without skidding. The other thing is that you want your arm weight to remain the same throughout the motion going from down or up to down. All right? So the mistake that a lot of us make is that we will lift the weight out of the string and then put it back in during the course of the change of direction. So if you can keep your bow in one spot on the string without changing speed or placement or arm weight, you'll get a nice, clean, sustained bow change. Now, how you teach your arm to do that consistently will, of course, vary from teacher to teacher. I'm personally a fan of breaking down the motion. So, and also thinking about it, what is your personal tendency? Do you have a tendency to slip as you change? Do you have a tendency to speed up or to slow down as you change? Or do you have a tendency to lift out and come back in terms of weight? So depending on which of those, or for some of us, all three of those is our tendency, those are the things you're going to want to address, and address them one at a time in your practicing. So using a mirror can be really effective here in terms of watching your bow placement, and does it slip, does it slide, what does it do? And I also like to practice a clean bow change first before I start connecting. So I will often practice this way, where I stop my bow and then start it. And the two things I'm doing with that is making sure that it's staying in exactly the same spot and that I'm maintaining the exact same arm weight. So I want to feel like my arm weight in my bow is completely unchanged, but my bow is just going to suddenly hit a brick wall and stop moving. Then my arm is not going to do any of that. As if I just ran into my other hand. So that doesn't change. Once you can do those two things effectively, you can start working on doing it without the stop. If you have control over those three things, you can do almost anything with a bow change. Question from John. I have trouble reaching thirds in third position. E to G is in the third suite of the element. It feels awkward, and my fingers aren't quite long or flexible enough. All right, John, that is a really, really good question. So, and you were talking about one of the trickier thirds. So, from an E to a G in third position, what makes this difficult is that it's an extended position, right? And what we tend to do, I think, obviously I can't tell you exactly what your personal tendencies are, but I can tell you in general what I typically see in students. For one thing, as always, finger tension. So the more tense your hand is, as you try to desperately reach that third, the less stretchy your hand is, right? The tighter something is, the less it stretches. The looser it is, the more easy it is to stretch. So really working on keeping your hand balanced and your arm weight pulling down the string, not squeezing, no squeezing your strings, no squeezing your thumb. The second thing is to really be aware of where you're doing that stretch in your hand. I think for so many of us, we try to stretch in between our second and third finger and our third and fourth fingers. Those are not where we're supposed to do extensions, and they're very unstretchy. You really want to do the full extension between your first and second fingers, okay? So that is where your extension happens. So one of the things I would do to really work on this is, if I'm in third position, so I have my first finger on the D string in third position, I'm playing a G natural. I'm going to use my second finger on the G string, playing a C sharp. It's going to sound a little, it's an interesting, and now I'm going to practice shifting from a C sharp to a D. So I'm going from unextended to extended while maintaining my first finger on the D string. Once that is comfortable, I can then, when I get to here, add my other fingers. Okay? If your cello is the right size for you, so I'm just going to assume you're not an 8-year-old trying to play a full-size cello here. If your cello is the right size for you, your hand is big enough. It really, I'm quite sure that it is. It's all about how relaxed it is and how good your extension technique is. The second you start squeezing with your left thumb, you won't be able to do that extension properly. So it's really more about learning that position and that specific technique to get those thirds more comfortable. Question from Amelia. could I address thumb position, specifically about weight distribution among fingers and thumb when we play octaves and other interval exercises? Of course. Hello to Germany. So, thumb position. How do we distribute our weight? So, remember I was talking about, in our first 4 positions, the sensation of the weight of your arm pulls the strings down, leaving your thumb in contact with the neck but flexible, which leaves your hand free to be balanced, and changing fingers is a matter of simply shifting your arm weight to the next finger. Well, thumb position is somewhat similar. So first of all, we really want to try to keep our hand position the same all the way through, so that what my hand looks like in first position is not dissimilar from what it looks like in thumb position. I'm not going to go from here to here, right? So the first thing you're going to do is make sure that you can slide up and down your string without changing the angle of your hand drastically. So when I'm in thumb position, that same thing is going to be true. With my arm weight is going to pull the strings down to the fingerboard. Typically speaking, the vast majority of that weight is going to be on my thumb. Okay, so at the beginning I am balanced on my thumb. And then, as I go into an octave, my weight balance is fairly even between my thumb and my third finger. Specifically, weight distribution between fingers and thumb when we play octaves and other interval. Yes, so I want to have my weight starting on my thumb here, across both strings. If I'm playing a D octave, I'm going to have a little more weight on this side of my thumb for the D string than on my A string. But it's, depending on your hand, it's pretty even. I would then go up my scale till I get to my F sharp. That's going to gradually get my weight shifting more and more into an even distribution between my thumb and my third finger. At this point, I can now add my third finger. That my weight is evenly distributed. I'm going to have a little more on the thumb than the third finger, but it's like 60% thumb, 49%, I know that math didn't work, my third finger. With my other fingers are going to be curved and hovering in support, all right? They're not pressing down, they're not standing up, all right? I'm balanced and supportive. All right, next question. What artists have been most influential to you in your life so far? In what ways have they affected your approach to music? Really great question. So, and that of course has varied greatly from year to year, depending on who I'm currently obsessed with. Certainly as a young child, I emulated Jacqueline Dupre. I think like so many young female cellists, she was such a hero. But specifically, what I always emulated about her playing and so many other people I've now listened to, heard, played with, is what I'm attracted to in both teachers and mentors and performers and collaborators are people who play with a real sense of joy, a real sense of love of the music. And that is often comes in all forms, in pianists. Somebody like Emmanuel Axe, I think, is a really great example of that. He's somebody who every note he plays is imbued with a sense of joyfulness for music. And as he plays, you get the sense that he is spending much more of his brain power listening to everything else that's going around him, and that he knows every other part. And then what he's doing with his hands is sort of just following along everybody else. That it's not about him and the technique of it. And that's the sort of playing that I'm really attracted to, and that I really hope to strive to have in my own playing somehow. So somebody like Emmanuel Axe on piano, somebody like Simon Keenlyside in the opera world, whose singing seems to come second to his complete embodiment of the character. And he approaches his roles with so much commitment and passion and joy for the process. Somebody like Gil Shaham really just expresses so much joy in every rehearsal and seems to love everything that we're doing together. That those are the sorts of people that really affect me. And the same with teachers. Teachers who've been most have had the biggest impact on me, I think, are the ones who seem to really want to help their students refine and express who they are on the cello, and rather than force them to fit into the mold of this is the only thing you do. Like, these are the 7 pieces I'm going to teach, and I'm going to do them in this order, and you're going to play them this way. But rather a teacher who helps their students to experiment and become their own teacher, their own coach, to understand music and brings out their strengths and doesn't just address their weaknesses. Question from Robert. Great. Do I have any tips on learning the fingerboard? I always need to really think where notes are and typically resort to starting with the first position, working up. Hey, it's a great place to start, first position. I'll tell you that. Robert, a lot of that is simply time. And I don't mean time spent in terms of like hours each day on the cello, but time over the course of weeks, months, and years. What I would really strongly advocate for you is, and for anybody who's really trying to learn the geography of the fingerboard, is that as you're practicing, especially as you're practicing slowly or a new piece, that every time you have to shift or figure out what the next note is, that you don't just think to yourself, oh gosh, okay, I have to play D and now I have to play E. Okay, D, E. But instead you think mentally, okay, I'm going from first position where I'm playing D, F sharp, B, A, G. D and G are across the string from each other. D and F sharp are here. And now I'm going to go to fourth position, which means my first finger is shifting from a B to an E. And in fourth position, I know the entire position because I've practiced all of my double stops while saying every single note, so that I know how each note within the position relates to one another. And if you did that for every position that you use in each piece that you learn for a year, it will before you know it, suddenly one day you're going to say to yourself, I didn't even have to think about it. I just know where all the notes are and how they relate to one another. So it's a matter of just working that thought process into your practicing really consistently every day. And I promise it will come. I really do. Okay, next question is, could I please elaborate on how I developed my career after completing conservatory studies? Teaching is an integral part of a musician's career. How did you begin to develop your pedagogical skills? That is a great question. Okay, so I first started teaching actually when I was in high school. My teacher in Calgary, where I grew up, is an incredible teacher who probably many of you already know. His name is John Katz. That's Katz with a D, not Katz with a T, who is another incredible teacher, just a little later in my life. So John Katz with a D, who was such a wonderful teacher, he had some students who wanted to have more than one lesson a week. And he wanted them to have more than one session, with a teacher every week. So he started to have me practice with his younger students, which was my first foray into teaching. It was very much under his guidance, and I wasn't the one making any decisions or fixing anybody's technique. I was there as a support system to help them practice what he was teaching them. And through that, I started to really analyze what he was saying to his students and how that worked. At the same time, I also started coaching young string quartets and helping them prepare for their coachings with their real coaches. And ever since high school, I've always taught. When I was in college, I continued to teach young cellists and even theory and piano, if only to just, pay bills. But I discovered as the years went on, and I continued to teach more and more, that it was the thing I loved the most, and I really love working with kids as they grow up through teenage life and into adults, to see their brains and their personalities change and see them becoming great people. And the thing I would say is that in order to develop my pedagogical skills, it was a matter of doing as much learning as possible. So going to master classes, listening to, asking great teachers if I could come and watch them teach, just sitting there and watching. Also spending a huge amount of time really with each student, patiently trying to get to know them and figure out what it is that they need to become a better cellist, and what do they respond to. So for most students, that means, how many different elements of things that need to be fixed can you focus on one lesson? It's usually a lot fewer than you would think. And watching my students interact with each other and comment on each other's playing in studio class to see what they're really absorbing and what they're not actually understanding. So really trying to approach each kid really separately and thoughtfully, as a whole person, not just as a cellist. And when you do that for like 30 some years, you start to get more comfortable, I think, with it. But I started young. You can start with just helping somebody practice. That's your first and best way to start learning how to teach, I think. Next comment from hi Martha, the Cleveland Orchestra is an inspiration for me. Thank you for your great comment. Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I have to tell you, the Cleveland Orchestra is a great inspiration to me. My colleagues in not just my section, but all the sections, but it sounds sort of trite, but it's true. If I can play with them and try to keep up with them, I feel like I've really had a good day at work. I'm lucky to be surrounded by such incredible players. Another question. Can I recall a specific piece of advice from any of my teachers that has proved to be particularly impactful throughout my career? Several different pieces of advice, yes. But the 2 or 3 biggest ones have been really finding and focusing on every day, finding the center of your sound, listening to your sound and feeling the relaxation in your body so that you can play with ease. That makes such a difference. To make that a real focus daily of my warm-up and my practicing. And I do realize I kind of skipped over a warm-up question. I only addressed it very briefly, so I do apologize for that. So that was one thing, is to really focus on that every day, the relaxation and the sensation of playing the cello. To play with joy every day, which goes into my next big thing, which is to not say negative things to yourself. So if I'm trying to fix something, let's take a really easy example. Let's say I'm missing a shift. So let's say I'm going from first to fourth position and I keep being flat. Like I keep going. What I want to say to myself is loosen your arm and shift higher. So that's an actionable, that's a positive thing I'm telling myself. I'm telling myself to do something, right? If I say to myself, don't be flat, that's not very helpful, and B, starts a habit of talking to yourself negatively about your playing and as you're playing, which will trickle down to self-confidence issues and tension issues. So to try to phrase things in you should do this, I want to do this, rather than don't do that, don't do this, avoid that. It sounds small, but it makes a big difference. And then I think the other really great piece of advice is that to really work on what I'm going to think about in my brain before I start each and every piece, which is particularly helpful helpful as you move from movement to movement or in yourself. And I'm going to practice it that way each time, and each time I perform it for somebody, so that my brain tells myself the same reminders every single time before I start. It goes through the same process. It makes it much easier to get your brain in the place where it needs to be consistent, and to have a greater comfort level on stage. So those were three, I think, of my best pieces of advice that I ever was given. Can I discuss the process of developing my personal sound and sound character? Yes. Every great musician has a sound that is identifiable. Yes, I agree. You know exactly who's playing with, yeah, absolutely. How do we work on this and not become poor versions of our teachers or idols? Which is a great question. So developing your personal sound it really is a matter of listening, okay? But not just to cellists. I advocate listening to as much live music as you can, or can afford to, or have time to. Recordings are wonderful too, but don't just listen to cellists. Listen to violists, listen to string quartets, listen to violinists, listen to singers, listen to a lot of singers. And then maybe listen to some more singers. And the more influences you have, you will start to distill them down into your own personal stew, right? So if you have 30 ingredients, you're gonna gradually, the more you listen, the more you refine your taste. What do you like, what do you not like? You're gonna use different amounts of each one of those ingredients. And then as you're practicing, before you play anything, I want you to have a really clear idea in your head of what you want it to sound like. In terms of the quality of sound, the vibrato, the overall expression, how you're moving from note to note. If you know what you want it to sound like before you do it, and then you can listen to yourself and evaluate how close you've gotten to your personal ideal, that's a better way. You don't want to just listen to one person all the time and try to sound like them, but you want to take bits and pieces of the things you like about different players and create your own mix of that, your own recipe. That marks the end of the questions. If you have any closing remarks, it would be great, and I'll let you know. Okay. I don't know that I have anything even particularly brilliant to say at the end, except that your questions were all really wonderful and thoughtful, and I really encourage you all to try to take time to enjoy the process of practicing and not get emotionally frustrated by what we tend to feel are failures. Not playing well one day, struggling with a passage, struggling with a particular technique, but instead break them down and find one little thing that maybe you can do better today, that maybe you can get a little bit better at today. If you can get a little bit better at one thing each day, and you do that every day of the year, you're going to get, by the end of the year, you're going to be better at 365 things. So think of your practicing as a fun long-term problem solving where you're just going to get a little better at something each day. And don't be so hard on yourself and try to get an entire passage or piece perfect all in one fell swoop, because that's just going to lead to frustration. So let's practice with joy and happiness. And that, I think, is my greatest advice for all of you. So thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed your questions, especially coming from all over the world. It was a real pleasure.